Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills. Welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is John McWhorter. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, you're an eminent linguist in America, one of the leading linguists. Will you tell my audience what a linguist is?
A linguist is not a translator. A linguist is definitely not somebody who tells people how they're supposed to talk. Linguists study what we call the science of language. That's about 8 things, but suffice it to say that we're interested in how it is that people manage to effortlessly speak language when it's so complicated, how people learn language, how language changes and why, and also how people speak languages differently depending on issues such as gender, class, race, and other kinds of identification. So, in a different universe, what's called linguistics would really probably be called about 5 different things, but that's what a linguist is. It's really what a linguist isn't. It's not about translation, and we do not care whether or not anyone is speaking with blackboard grammar.
Yes. Right now on the planet, there are about 6,000 separate languages. What is the future of these many and diverse languages?
Grim. Probably in about 100 years, there'll be about 600 languages spoken. The small languages, usually ones that most of us haven't ever heard of, are unlikely to last because a few big languages are eating them all up.
And then when that last language speaker dies, a whole perspective of reality goes.
It is hard in that way. I mean, there are people who say that your language is a channel for thought, that your language makes you think a certain way, that the way your language works is your culture. You have to be careful with that idea, because for everything in a language that you want to associate with a culture, and so if a language gives gender to inanimate objects, you like the idea that to those people, chairs and boats and moons have some sort of gender. The problem is languages also have a lot of things that make you say unpleasant things about the speakers. So Chinese is a very telegraphic language. You don't have to say as much as you do have to say. We don't want to say that Chinese makes its speakers think not much. And so you have to temper the idea that your language is your culture, but obviously your language is part of your being a culture at all. Part of being a culture is to have a code that nobody else can understand. So we are losing an awful lot of those codes, and all it takes is one generation that don't learn it in the cradle, and it's gone. Imagine if nobody spoke English and we had to learn it from a book. That would not be the language that we're speaking now. So languages die in a sadly permanent way.
So you are an author, and you've just mentioned your most recent book is called The Language Hoax, Why the World Looks the Same in Any Language, and that was just what you were talking about. So there is a common assumption that we see the world through the lens of our language and our grammar structures, and in things like pronouns, the gender bias in he versus she and mankind. And you say that really sounds good, but it's not quite like that, that we do not, the grammar of our language does not program the way we think.
Yeah, and in addition to what I said about Chinese and how you certainly don't want to say that Mandarin Chinese channels its speakers to not think as much as we do, you also have the problem that some people try to change language hoping it'll change our thoughts. But the truth is that what we have to work on is changing the thoughts. And so, for example, there used to be something called home relief. And home relief gradually came to be basically hissed by people who knew about it. They changed that, therefore, to welfare. And if you think about what a beautiful, warm word welfare is, but you have to think about it because we have these associations with it. Today, one is to say cash assistance. That will be worn out in another 20 years. And it's the same way with crippled, which used to be a very very polite word, and then that goes to handicapped, and then disabled. Now we're saying differently abled. Changing the word doesn't do it, because whatever the negative thoughts that you're trying to expunge, just they scatter like a bunch of pigeons, and then they come settle right back down on the word. So you have to change the thoughts. Language and thought don't walk in the lockstep that we're often told.
One of the most popular items to support this theory is there are two things. That the man, Benjamin Lee Whorf, who was a proponent of the theory that your language colors your vision, he worked a lot with the Hopi.
He did.
And so he felt that because the Hopi he did not observe tense markers in the Hopi language. He felt, well, this is reflexive of the cyclic cosmology that the Hopi live by.
Right, and he unfortunately
missed those tense
he
markers.
didn't know Hopi that well. And so you want that to be true. These people don't have tense markers and they think of time as cyclic. Who doesn't want that to be true? But as so often, the funnest facts are the ones that aren't true, and the Hopi do have tense markers.
And the Inuit and snow. Talk about that.
Well,
People love this one.
Yeah, the idea that because the Inuit have so much snow, they have 200 words for it. And the truth is that they don't have 200 words. Now, the anti-truth used to be that they only have the same 3 or 4 words that we have, snow, sleet, whatever. Truth is, I think there's a second truth, which is that they have more words for snow than we do, and the reason for that is that they live in snow. And so the point is not that language and culture are not connected, it's that they don't walk in the lockstep that we're told. And so, for example, if Chinese doesn't have a future tense in the way that English does, that doesn't mean that they don't think about the future.
You're here as a guest at the Santa Fe Institute, and you gave a lecture, and one of these bright people had talked about these nomadic people who are drifting about in canoes, therefore they had no future tense.
Yeah.
What?
That doesn't make any sense. It was this group of people in Chile, and their language, like many languages, like Russian, doesn't have a future tense. They don't have to explicitly say something's in the future. It's context. And the journalist thought that might have something to do with the fact that they're always traveling in canoes, and so the future is somehow taken care of concretely or something. Obviously, that doesn't make sense. A lot of what's in a language or what's not in a language is a jolly accident. Languages are still fascinating.
You have written many, many books. First of all, you write for Time, The Atlantic, Wall Street Journal, CNN, The New York Times, Huffington Post, Daily Beast.
Goodness.
You write a lot, yeah. And you've written, 16, 17 books?
Oh, it's 20.
20
as
now.
of the end of this year. Yeah.
Oh, good. So you have many categories of your work. Your books about language are really classic. What language is, and what's the subtitle?
What language is, and what it
isn't,
and what it could be.
Yeah,
that's what.
tantalizing.
I'm almost forgetting.
And then a wonderful one about English called Our Magnificent Bastard Tongue.
My favorite lately. Yeah.
Yes. And The Power of Babel, A Natural History of Language.
My baby. That was my first one.
Was that your first one?
Actually, it was my second one, but it was the first one that got any real attention. So,
yeah. So you are really, your reputation is such to be a leading linguist in America, and people come to you with all these language issues. Well, you don't have to accept that.
Well, what is nice is that people do come to me these days, and I like that because I never really sought it, but I do like that I get to sound off to more than just myself, because I guess that is why you write books. But
Yeah.
the truth is, when you write books, you're always so busy writing the next one, you don't have time to think much about what your reputation is. But yeah, I get asked. I'm happy to be asked.
You get asked by people as diverse as, of course, CNN, but also Bill Maher and Stephen Colbert and
I remember that.
yeah. So you also write a lot of books about race relations, and there's a long history. Also, you work with the history of music too. You had the book All About the Beat. That I guess that was in 2008.
That was my biggest flop. That's the only one that didn't even get a paperback. I just wanted to mention that because I find that as interesting as the successes.
And the subtitle is Why Hip Hop Can't Save Black America.
Nobody wanted to hear that.
Nobody wanted to hear that. But you have a wonderful series, 2000 Losing the Race, Self-Sabotage in Black America. 2005, Winning the Race, Beyond the Crisis in Black America. And then one that I haven't read, but the title is I will read it.
What's the other one?
2003, Authentically Black, Essays for the Black Silent Majority.
That's right. Yeah, those books are a whole other me. I won't be writing any more like that. And I mean, never say never, but I don't think up books about race per se. I've got one coming out about Black English because I thought I had a duty to write a book about that from my own perspective. But there won't be any more What Black People Should Do Now books. But I thought that there needed to be some back in the decade before this. And the silent majority part of that subtitle was based on the simple fact that often a lot of my views on race are against the grain. And there's a certain kind of person who I can tell genuinely thinks that I write those things because I'm sitting and trying to throw bombs, that I'm trying to see what's going to get people upset, that I'm kind of some sort of black male, if I may, Ann Coulter. And that really isn't it. Generally, what I write about race, and I write columns about race like gangbusters these days, and I'll always do that, is because I think, not only do I think this, but I can tell lots of other black people think it, but we're trained to think that we're not supposed to say it, or we're not supposed to say it directly. We're supposed to pad it so much that we might as well not have said it. And so I've often thought, most black people think what I think, but there's a certain writerly/scholarly class who are regularly called upon by the media to express a certain view, which I'm happy to have out there. But my job sometimes is to counterbalance it without being dismissed as a Republican conservative weirdo. And I got that a lot until I came out for Obama. Nowadays, I think there's a critical mass of people who understand that I am a cranky liberal. I'm a Democrat. I'm not conservative. I'm just telling it as I see it. So the race stuff is a duty. The language stuff is joy.
Well, there you do have lots of articles, and two of them particularly moved me so deeply. One in Guernica magazine called Thick of Tongue, because you say you're a black person who sounds white, and that is actually a social handicap, and that somehow you ended up talking like an announcer in a 1940s newsreel.
I certainly did. And it's a curse. And I hadn't written about it until now, I'm 50, because it's more of a curse to be someone who sounds significantly black when they talk and is immediately read as being not as bright. That's a serious problem. It interferes with people's scholastic performance. It can make you sound less authoritative in many settings.
And you call that a blaccent.
I call that a blaccent. I'm trying to create a word. I want blaccent to be accepted.
Yeah.
But the truth is, to be a black person who sounds like this, and I hear, especially after that article, that I do sound black, and if so, good. But that is certainly not the feedback that I've gotten in my life until I wrote that article, is that you are assumed by many people to be, you're snooty, and many black people, quite frankly, think that you might not like them because you talk like the white person. I get it. If I were those black people, I would probably hear me the same way. But the hard thing is that none of us can talk differently than the way we always have. I can't put on a different voice. I can't sound like Cuba Gooding.
It's
and
also
so you're just
hard
stuck with the way you talk.
to hear your own way of talking, because that's how you talk.
don't know how you sound.
Yeah.
And so that's what that piece was about, that I feel as vocally handicapped as many black people do because they have the blaccent, which is a much bigger problem. But to be black and to sound this blanched is a social handicap as well.
We're speaking today with John McWhorter, a linguist and an author. And there was just one other article I wanted to make because it made so much sense to me. It was in the Daily Beast, and it was called Anti-Racism, Our Flawed New Religion. Yeah. And as soon as I read that, I started looking at all these outbursts of anti-racism and see that there really is a priest class of this new religion. And so I urge people to Google you and to find all these articles because they're quite extraordinary.
Yeah, the anti-racism piece, frankly, I liked that one. That one kind of jumped out of me very quickly. I really felt like that needed to get out there. And I think it got around a decent bit. And all I was referring to was that often when we are battling racism, and by we, I frankly mean, in this case, white people more than black people. I think it's people who are on black people's sides. It often has gone over the past 40 years from targeted, concrete effort and opinions to what's really a kind of a faith. And the problem with it being a faith is that facts aren't allowed, or just attesting to how you feel is somehow seen as an action. And I'm not going to get ad hominem about who I mean and who's being responded to, but I'll say that, for example, the new fashion of having white people attest to their white privilege with the idea that and then everybody goes home is somehow important. I don't see how that feeds anybody in the inner city. I don't see how that helps a little black girl learn how to read. I don't see how that keeps a teenage black man from, I don't see how that teaches him how to keep a job. I don't see that as activism the way civil rights leaders would have 50 years ago. But today there's this idea that a white person saying, I attest that I am privileged, is somehow significant, when really it doesn't do a damn thing. And I think that the reason that we don't think about that very much is because there's a sense that what you're supposed to do is pray and testify in church and then go home and live your life. It's a religion. And I think people need to think about it, because what I'm committed to is activism, is helping people, is doing things. Too often today, what people are doing is just testifying. It won't do.
Well, the other thing, we're going to have some fun now. The other thing that people are doing is texting.
Oh, that.
And,
yeah.
and this is one of my favorite. You've got a wonderful TED Talk about texting, and the title of it is Texting is Killing Language, JK. Well, I had to Google JK, which means just kidding.
That's what the kids are saying. Yeah.
Exactly. But so communications in our language, it's changing right in front of us.
Yep.
It's a new way of using language. Talk to me about texting and where we're going with this.
Well, you know what texting actually is? It's talking. It's writing in the physical sense, but what you're doing with texting is you're doing the same thing as you're doing when conversing. You are discussing informal things in short little bursts using a lot of playful language. And the whole idea as to whether texting is proper is as irrelevant as whether there's an oboe in the Rolling Stones. You're missing the point to think that any of this would be written in the language of the Wall Street Journal. People worry that texting is the end of writing, but all evidence is that people are capable of making a difference between when they're writing an essay and when they're texting. And the truth is that people are writing now more than they ever had to before about 10 years ago. I know people who never liked writing and maybe even had a certain disability in it, who are taken aback by today because all of a sudden, just to socialize as a normal person, you need to be writing all the time. So I think we should be happy to see young people writing rather than just talking as much as they have to do. Now, no, they're not writing on the level of Milton, but they're using the written word, and often in a more creative way than we often think. And I really didn't care about texting until about 10 minutes before that TED. But they wanted me to do something. I think, frankly, they wanted me to do something about race. And I thought, no, I want to be cuddly if I do TED. And I thought, well, what do I have that they would enjoy? And all of my students at Columbia are texting, and they had taught me that there's a grammar in it, that there's systematicity in what looks like chaos. And I thought, that's what I want to share with the whole world, not, anti-racism as a religion. So that's how that started, and I haven't quite let it go since.
Well, you talk about the history. Mankind has been on Earth for 200,000 years. Language we've had for 150,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And you said if our span on Earth were a 24-hour clock,
Mm-hmm.
writing only comes up at 11:07 p.m.
That's right.
This is so recent.
Isn't that a fun factoid?
Yeah.
Which shows that language is what we're doing, talking. That's what we're genetically specified to do. Writing is this weird artifice that comes along very late in the game. Some people are never very good at it. A great many people never particularly like reading, even if they are taught to pretend that they do. What language is speaking and listening and interacting live. And texting is interesting because it takes writing into that spoken direction. It takes writing into a direction that I think is much more comfortable for many people than it ever has been before. Suddenly, we have fingered speech. We can write the way we talk, in the same way as in an earlier era we used to be taught to talk the way we wrote, the old style oration. So there are different ways of using language, and texting is almost predictable once there's a certain technology. But it's fun, and it's healthy, and it's harmless, like so many things.
You go into several of the abbreviations, like JK, just kidding, but LOL, slash, and hey. But let's talk for a minute about LOL, because we get these texts, and LOL is supposed to mean laughing out loud. But this is not anything that people would be laughing at, guffawing, as you say.
No.
But now it's another kind of, it serves a grammatical function. Tell us
Very
about
much.
that.
LOL doesn't have anything to do anymore with actual laughing. What it is that in casual conversation, if you listen to your own or certainly other people's, people do a lot of idle laughing that really isn't about anything being all that funny. It's just this sort of prophylactic laughing that we do that eases the situation. People who don't do any of this giggling or quick little joking or laughing often are seen as rather threatening. It seems like they don't like you. LOL is the exact equivalent of that kind of laughter that ordinary people do, even in conversations that aren't supposed to be funny. It basically indicates empathy and ease. It takes the sting off of a statement. And so it makes this quote-unquote writing more like speech. And also, I'll add something that was not even clear 3 years ago when I did the TED Talk, that texting changes just like language. It's getting to the point that I'm told by some of my students currently, LOL is getting a little old-fashioned. You know, it got a certain amount of attention, for one thing. Ha-ha is now becoming what LOL used to be. LOL is beginning to date you as a texter. That's what the old texters are doing. And who knows what the new one will be in 10 years. So this is just language on the march as always.
But one of the things you point out, this emphatic participle, sort of, is like in Japanese, they often will just say ne at the end of a sentence.
Yeah, to soften things up.
And in Black American, there's yo.
Exact same thing. There are many languages that have little particles like this, and LOL is a nice little particle.
Yeah, and are you with me? And, you know, we're just
Are you with
touching
me?
base.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. What about slash?
Slash is a way of changing the subject without being abrupt when you have so little space. And so you have said that's two things by using slash. I'm told by my little birds that that is not as widespread as you might think. Some people like slash more than others, but it's a nice way to say two things in the same text without writing two texts. But that means that it's a little piece of grammar. Who knew texting had grammar?
Emojis. Now we're not even verbalizing.
Yeah.
What do you think? What's going on? I was visited by an 8-year-old who took his grandmother's cell phone and put 200 emojis. She had to delete one by one. I mean, he said, "I love emojis."
Because they're so cute.
Yeah.
Emojis are more evidence that texting is not writing, but it's talking. Those emojis give the face to all of these words. And so when you put the smile on, once again, you're indicating that everything is okay. Or think of it this way. You can say to somebody, well, horses run pretty fast too. What did the well mean? If you think about it, the well didn't mean goodly. It didn't mean with excellence.
Or a hole with water in it.
It didn't mean the thing that has water in it or anything like that. Do you think about how seldom you actually see a well in modern life? I've rarely seen a well. Anyway, but well really means I acknowledge what you said, but I have something to say that is slightly different. It's a very polite thing, that little well. You never think about it. Emojis serve that kind of function. They're nice little intermediators that make all of language more civil. And of course, nobody's thinking about this, but it's why texting is really speech.
So what's new? What is a coming wave of texting? What are we seeing?
We're going to see more and more emojis because they are very useful and they are proliferating. They are being made to proliferate on purpose, and people are using them more and more creatively. And in terms of language in general, what we're seeing is something that I wrote about in a controversially received book that I did 10 plus years ago called Doing Our Own Thing, where I was basically just trying to say that informal language now has a much larger place in the public forum than anybody would have dreamed it would have 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. There used to be a sense that in public, language is supposed to be in stiff, itchy clothes, and that casual language is only behind closed doors. That changed somewhere around 1966, and we live in a very different culture now, and that changes ever more, I'm noticing, by the decade in terms of what's in an advertisement, the way people talk on TV, what constitutes profanity and what doesn't. That's going to be more and more the case. So, for example, the fact that people are writing, if you want to call texting writing, in such an informal way is part of a larger phenomenon in which there's going to be less of a split between formal language and informal language, and ever less of a space for formal language at all. It's going to become something that is needed less and less. But that doesn't mean that there's a degradation going on, because informal language is just as complex and nuanced as formal language. It's just different.
So do these change, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do these changes in language affect our brain and our consciousness, or do changes in our consciousness affect these changes in language? I mean, that's like the basic question of linguistics.
Sure.
I'm asking you with a minute to go.
No, that's okay. It's our consciousness.
Yeah.
Because we didn't just start changing the way we thought of language, but still walk around in the fedoras and the girdles, etc. At the exact same time, people started dressing in a different way. At the exact same time, people started having sex in a different way and talking about it more openly. At the exact same time, people stopped touching when they were dancing and started wiggling in place in front of each other, doing their own thing. We're so used to that now. Imagine in 1915, two people standing in front of each other, dancing in different ways, but not turning and facing in any other. That would have been anthropologically bizarre. The way we dance now, all of this starts in the 60s. And so we started talking differently because we became different people. All of it was of a piece.
Well, what an extraordinary vision you have, and what a wonderful journey we've had. I wish we had more time. I want to thank you for being our guest today. Is John McWhorter.
Thank you, Lorene.
It's been a real pleasure. And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you for joining us this week on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.